Okay, so we wanted to go on to the third chapter of Yevamot, and uh, Zoom is sharing a window. Thank you. That's very nice of you to tell me. Okay. um, the first Mishnah of the third chapter it continues this what we've been talking about with uh, men marrying sisters. In this case, we're talking about four brothers, and two of the brothers marry two sisters, and both of the brothers die without children. And but there are still two other brothers who are brother-in-laws of the widows. And in this case, this Mishnah says they can only perform chalitza. Neither one of them can marry the widow. This conflicts on the surface with what we learned in chapter 2, that in the case of two sisters, one brother can perform chalitza, and that cuts the connection, and the second brother, if he wishes, can marry the other sister. Here, in this case, we have both of them, both sisters, both sisters cannot be married to either of the surviving brothers. And the Mishnah continues, if kadmu, if they acted before the Beit Din could tell them they're not allowed to marry, and they do marry, then they have to divorce. Rabbi Eliezer says, Beit Shammai says, no, they can stay married. Beit Hillel says, no, they have to divorce. Let's look at the English, because it has obviously an explanation that's not in the bold. In the case of four brothers, two of the brothers are married to two sisters, and both of them die, and is assuming, obviously, with no children. Then those sisters, the two widows, must perform chalitza and may not marry either of the two surviving brothers. Now the explanation. Since both sisters require levirate marriage with each of the surviving brothers, a levirate bond, here we get that language that we saw last time, Zayin Kuf Kuf, Zokek, Zakuk. There's a connection, there's a bond between each sister and the two surviving brothers. Each of them is considered the sister of a woman with whom each brother has a levirate bond and is therefore forbidden by rabbinic law. If, however, they married before consulting the court, then they have to divorce. For the sages decreed that in this situation they may not remain married. Rabbi Eliezer says there's a dispute in this matter. Beit Shammai says they can stay married. Beit Hillel says they have to divorce. So this conflicts really with the what we learned in chapter 2, and so there has to be some reason, and that there's a difference. So let me read Steinsaltz's explanation. One could suggest that one of the brothers performs chalitza with one sister, and then afterwards the second brother can marry the other sister, as she would then no longer be the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. That was the reasoning in chapter 2. So he's saying we could compare that to that and say that. But in this Mishnah, it's not allowed. Why? According to the opinion that it is prohibited to negate the mitzvah of levirate marriage, there is a concern that they will confuse the order and perform levirate marriage first before chalitza. And then he's marrying his sister-in-law. The chalitza has to be formed first, so the break between them is set. So in this case, Steinsaltz says there's concern that they'll mix it up and confuse it. According to the opinion that the levirate bond is substantial, the second brother may not consummate the levirate marriage, as the woman was forbidden to him one time as the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond, and she can no longer be rendered permitted. That, he quotes one of the commentaries to the Mishnah, known as Tosafot HaRosh. There are other explanations given, but the truth of the matter is that we have a conflict here in the understanding. To complicate things further, in our Mishnah, we see that that Rabbi Eliezer says there's a dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, that Beit Hillel is of the opinion that that they have to be divorced, as the Tanakama, as the Stam Mishnah, the beginning of the Mishnah without a name. We call it Stam Mishnah. That is, or it's also known as Tanakama. Tana means the one who taught, and Kama is the first. So the first teacher, unnamed, that is the opinion here of the Beit Hillel, whereas Beit Shammai says no, they can stay married. Interesting enough, in the Babylonian Talmud, we have another opinion of a teacher by the name of Abba Shaul, who reverses it and says, no, it's Beit Shammai who says they have to divorce, and Beit Hillel who says, no, they can stay married, which would then make Beit Shammai agree with the Tanakama, and Beit Hillel disagree with the Nelson.
Well, my intuition is that the forcing them to divorce is more strict than allowing them to remain married.
That is correct.
But normally Hillel is less strict than Shammai.
Very, very correct and very insightful. And I have to tell you that my commentary makes that point in exactly those words. So I'm very pleased to 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 tell you that you have made a statement that I'll read it. I'll translate it to you. Um, um, uh, in the Gemara, Abba Shaul disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer, who's here quoted in the Mishnah, and he says Beit Shammai says they have to be divorced, and Beit Hillel says they can stay married. That is to say that here also, like in the majority of the disputes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai is more strict and Beit Hillel is less strict. Exactly your point. We're in terms of what the halacha is, one of the very nice things about the Steinsaltz Talmud is that he always has a section on the halacha. And here he quotes, in the case of 4 brothers, 2 of whom were married to 2 sisters and died childless, these sisters must perform chalitza and may not enter into levirate marriage. If the brothers married the sisters before consulting the court, they must divorce them. This is the opinion of Rambam and of the Shulchan Aruch. So that's the halacha. They must be divorced, and that's the law. Bob, you had a question?
Yeah, first I think they should do toxicology studies on those 2 brothers that died.
Find out what in the genes. Yeah. Well,
but I also think, what if they had one sister perform chalitza on one brother and the other sister perform chalitza on the other brother?
Yes, that's what has to happen. That's what has to happen.
That would be the way around that.
Yes, that's what they mean. That both of them do it, and they do it with each of the surviving brothers, and that breaks the connection, and they're not according to this Mishnah, they cannot. Neither of the surviving brothers, can marry either of the widows.
If there's a 5th brother, would he be available?
Wait, he can't either. According to this Mishnah. Remember, in chapter 2, we had a way out of that the first one performs chalitza, breaks the tie, and the second one can marry the sister, because we're not any worried about marrying your sister-in-law. Okay, so it is. It only gets more complicated if we went into the Gemara, but I think it's bad enough. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll go on to the next Mishnah. Where am I? I'm sorry, just cancel. Let me just see. Okay, share. Why aren't you there? Share, share. This doesn't look right. Oh, okay, I don't know. Here, we're in this one. Okay, so the next Mishnah continues with this case where we have four brothers and two of them are married to two sisters. Now this continues. One of the sisters is forbidden to one of the brothers because that brother is related to that sister, and therefore any kind of a sexual connection would be incest, would be arayot, would be erva. Here translated forbidden relations. That is, she was a relative of his wife or a relative on his mother's side. Asurba, he is forbidden to marry her, but mutar ba'achota, but he can marry her sister. And the second one, the second brother, is forbidden to both of them as both with Isur Mitzvah and Isur Kedusha. And therefore there has to be Chalitza and no Yibum. You'll remember these terms, Isur Mitzvah and Isur Kedusha. We saw those terms in the last Mishnah, in the last chapter. Isur Mitzvah is interpreted to mean not only the forbidden relationships that are in the Torah, but the rabbis added onto the relationships, and Isur Mitzvah relates to those additional connections, family connections, that are considered forbidden. The second, Isur Kedusha, refers to a marriage with a Kohen, that a Kohen Gadol as a limited who he can marry, and a Stam Kohen, a regular Kohen, is also limited. So these are in addition to the laws of arayot, of forbidden sexual relationships in the Torah. Let's look for a minute at the translation because, again, it will add a little commentary. If one of these sisters that we're talking about was forbidden to one of the brothers due to a relationship, she was a relative of his wife or a relative on his mother's side, then he's forbidden to marry her, but he can marry her sister. And oopsie, sorry, that's not what I want.
These are cases where the two sisters might not have both the same parents, right?
Exactly. But with the one that she has a close relative and therefore is cannot marry, therefore, but the second one can, because she doesn't have that same relative, and therefore she can be married. Consequently, her sister, God, sorry. Her sister is not considered the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond, and he is permitted to enter into levirate marriage with her. That is, because of the family relationship, the levirate connection it doesn't even exist. She is forbidden because of the relationship, and therefore the second sister, who is not a relative, can marry one of the surviving brothers. But the second brother, who is not a close relative of either sister, is forbidden to marry both of them. Indeed, for him, each woman remains the sister of a woman with whom he has the levirate bond. If a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, that is Isur mitzvah, or a prohibition stemming from sanctity, that is Isur kedusha, will be transgressed when one of the women marries one of the brothers, then again, her sister must perform chalitza and may not enter at levirate marriage, as she is considered the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. In this case, the sister who's forbidden to the brother due to a Isur mitzvah or due to a Isur kedusha is bound to the brother for the purposes of chalitza. So we complicate things further. Yes, Nelson.
Does the phrase levirate bond have any meaning other than this kind of marriage relationship?
This term levirate bond is an attempt to translate this root of Zion Kuf Kuf, Zakuk, Zokek. We call her a Zakukato. He has this relationship. It's a connection, and this is what is the crucial point in this. If the connection exists, then all of this applies. If the connection doesn't exist, then it doesn't apply.
Is it fair to assume a person like myself who has no brother doesn't have any problems?
No, you have no, had you had no children and you died, God forbid, there's no brother to marry your widow, she's out of luck.
Of course, I have a question.
Of course, in those days, excuse me, of course, in those days, they had bigger families. Part of the problem, though, was that many of the children did not live to puberty. They died. There were no antibiotics. You got sick, you died. And so, though a mother may have had 10 children, that maybe only 2 of them survived to puberty. So it was a very different situation, and we have to keep that in mind. Elliot.
Yes, Rabbi, I was off on the phone and may have missed something, but anyhow, as I listen to what you're discussing, it all seems very complex and it gets you thinking and asking a lot of questions, which I like. But in terms of the day and age in which we live, I wonder to what extent the conservative movement has officially gotten involved and established rulings regarding relationships. For example, when I hear this expression, his husband, or a woman says, my wife, I have a lot of trouble with that. And I just wonder if the conservative movement is going to get involved with details regarding what they consider as halachically permissible, although it would seem to me from the surface, a lot of this stuff is an abomination. Pardon me for being honest. I wonder if they will. So today, even in B'nai Yeshurun, you have over a restroom a statement welcoming people of all biological assignments or their own personal identity are welcome in this restroom.
And
If you
Rabbi,
look
were there such unions in those times of the same-sex unions? Did it ever exist?
No, 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 not at all. Not at all. If you look carefully at the Sidur Lev Shalem, at the Mishaberach sections, we have a whole section of Mishaberach for naming of a child, of a future wedding, etc., etc. And we deliberately have for same-sex couples, as you know, in Hebrew, it's either masculine or feminine, though I did read online some attempts to find a way of using Hebrew in a way that non-binary people can have a suffix, and we can have a suffix that's neither male nor female, or both, or whatever. I don't know. Anyhow, if you look carefully at the Lev Shalem, you will see that we in that Sidur, we account for same-sex couples, both in terms of pre-marriage, in terms of children, etc., etc. We did not deal at that time with the issue of transgenders. That now is an issue that the conservative movement has been considering, and in fact, I saw recently I think it's a tshuva, a formal responsum dealing with a woman who transitions to a male and has operations that create a penis, whether that penis requires circumcision. Obviously, that's not going to be. I don't just. I haven't seen any reference, any pictures of what that organ would look like, but according to the tshuva, that trans now man would require hatafat dam, would require a symbolic taking a drop of blood from that organ. If that were someone who was converting. So.
On that note, I have to say goodbye. I would love to hear the rest of the conversation, but I got to go.
Rabbi, can
Okay.
I make a comment when you're ready?
Yes, you go ahead, Elliot.
Yes, you know, you often hear these stories of how when a kid would come home from college, let's say a male, and a child would tell the parents he found someone he loves. The first question would be, "Is that person Jewish?" And if the
Right.
answer was yes, it would be great. Now maybe the first question would be, they would be thrilled if the person that their child has fallen in love with would be of the opposite gender assigned by Hashem. So what can I say?
No,
I pray for the conservative movement. Pardon me for being honest.
but I'm sorry, I'm also of your generation, and we out the cockers, are as with so many other things, we are dealing with things that younger generations take for granted or are much more comfortable with than we are. I always say change is inevitable, and it's a change that people are dealing with. I have to tell you that I am familiar with a couple. We were at one time quite close, and they had 3 children. As I recall, one was male, 2 were male, and 1 female, I believe. Well, the male is now a female, and the female is now a male. And we had to make a shiva call to the grandfather of these kids, for the grandfather of these kids. We spent a lot of time talking to the one who was born female and who was born male and now identifies as female. You could see the beard. I mean, she shaves, obviously, but and the one born male who now identifies as female was cleaning up and serving and so forth and so on, playing the role of the woman, right? Taking care, cleaning up the kitchen, doing the dishes, laying out the food, etc., etc. To tell you that I was uncomfortable, yes, I was uncomfortable. But in fact, the mother of these kids started a camp. And in fact, when we visited for the Shiva, it was the first day of her camp. And she said there were 60 kids who came to that camp who are trans, identify as trans. And everyone there is, and it's all of the campers are trans, and some of the counselors and also are so new. By the way, she was honored, this woman who started this camp, for that achievement. Yes, Stephen.
So, Rabbi, considering your lecture to the Jewish think tank and what you're discussing today, I agree with you from your previous comments. Because when you have a situation, in our case, Judaism, aside from Sephardic, in Ashkenazic Judaism, if you have 3 groups who 100 years ago, until recent times, had more or less an equal balance. There was a Reform a conservative and an Orthodox. There was affiliation between them, and there's transition from one group to another of individuals or even of synagogues. But the future seems to hold no, you hear this, Elliot? No middle ground. It seems, as I've read and heard, a rift is on the horizon in Judaism, a split of two religions, the end of the conservative movement joining with the reform movement or declining to such a minimal number, and the orthodoxy with Chabad leading the way, and Young Israel and other groups being equal to the other group of Jews, and the causing of a split in a very clear split in the Jewish world.
I would just add that you neglected the largest, the element that is growing most, and that is the nuns, Nones. Those who don't identify either way. That's the great, those are the numbers that are growing the fastest.
Rabbi, I'd like to make a comment relates to my field. Can I offer it now, Rabbi?
Sure.
As a speech therapist, now this hits close to home, there are now transgender speech clinics which help a person who wants to make that transition to the opposite sex to teach them vocal patterns that will sound more like the voice of the opposite sex. That's something, and if I were assigned a case like that, I would resign my job. Interestingly enough, the first transgender speech clinic that I heard of is going back maybe 15 to 18 years when it was advertising itself, and that was at the College of Saint Rose in Albany, New York, a Catholic-sponsored institution that would have a transgender speech clinic. So there it is.
Never.
And one more question, Rabbi, since you seem to be familiar with the nuns, I may have asked this before. In Rochester, New York, this actually exists. There is a group of monks who produce a good bread that a lot of people like. It's called monk's bread, sold in supermarkets there. So what I want to know is, if they have monk's bread, do you think they'll come about with nuns' buns?
That's very surprising to me that something like that was done 7 or 8 years ago. Nelson, please.
A young man who graduated from college when I did, who was very strange then, began teaching speech in a California school, which was designed to teach the difference between female and male grammar, and was teaching it particularly for men who wanted to become women. And this was 50 years ago.
Wanted to transition?
Yeah.
Well,
I've been going on for a long time, and I just don't think we've been paying any attention.
Yeah, well, no, I think you are correct that these things, I suspect that they existed in Talmudic times too. Growing up, we didn't appreciate, we didn't know about much of this. It was secret. People didn't talk about it. One of the changes that we're living through is that this is now something that is open, and this woman, this actress, Anne, I forget, Hecht or something like that, who was born in Aurora, Ohio, who just died in a terrible automobile accident, came out as a lesbian with Ellen DeGeneres years ago. then it was a big deal. Lesbians on TV? Today? It's nothing.
Rabbi, if the Torah is a guide for living, instruction manual as to how to live, what are there eternal standards that are never supposed to change? Unchangeable standards. And what are they?
Well, I think again, we're not talking about unchangeable standards. Years ago, I think I mentioned this, when the issue of admitting outwardly homosexuals to be rabbinical students was an issue for the conservative movement. I, together with about 15 other rabbis, served on a special commission called the Sexuality Commission, which was established by the Rabbinical Assembly to deal with the issue of homosexuality and to learn from experts. We heard from biology professors, we heard from psychiatrists, we heard from parents of homosexuals, we heard from homosexuals. We really, it was we met maybe 6 times, something like that, over a year and a half. We each were asked to write a paper. And I, at the beginning, wrote a paper building on the prophet Hosea and his talking about the relationship that the people of Israel have with God in terms of a marital relationship, which can be, and for Hosea, it was broken because the people of Israel were disloyal to God and were worshiping Baal and pagan gods. And this was seen as adultery, as being unfaithful. I relied on this and wrote my paper affirming homosexual relationships and kind of critiquing kind of the very prominent promiscuousness of homosexual relations. That my argument was that what we should be doing is to create a kind of a love relationship with a significant other that is of a loyal, faithful nature, loving nature, that this is our human effort to mimic our human divine relationship. That the love that we have for the other represents the love that we have for God. Buber, of course, in I, Thou, kind of goes into this. But I was trying to argue, by the end of our sessions, I realized that the community at that time, this is now 30 years ago, was not ready to do anything more than what we had already on the books, which was that congregations should be welcoming to everyone, no matter what their sexual identity, their sexual communities should be welcoming. That's what we came up with. We had a number of questions which we asked the law committee, but the law committee of the Rabbinical Assembly at that point ignored us. I have to tell you that Ismar Shorsh, who was at that time the chancellor of the seminary, came to our commission and begged us to dissolve. He said this conservative movement was so split over the issue of ordaining women that we don't need now to deal with another issue that's going to split us. And anyhow, this homosexual thing is just going to go away. It's a fad. It only represents a tiny percentage of people. Forget about it. Don't, please, I don't want you to continue. Just end. The Rabbinical Assembly said, no, we're not going to end. But we ended up really, we issued a pamphlet, you can still get it, I guess, on intimate relationships. And but in terms of the real issue, it was not yet time. Of course, as you know, the conservative movement followed the Reconstructionist movement and then the Reform movement, and now will admit outwardly homosexual students. Yes, Bob, unmute, yeah?
Yeah. There used to be a commercial that said only your hairdresser knows for sure. That was
Yes.
somebody who did not know about pharmacists knowing for sure. At the time of Mishnah, there was no hormonal treatment for transsexuals.
Absolutely not.
In biology class at Ohio State 50 years ago, they showed us a species of butterfly that the male and female had different wing patterns. So by looking at the pattern on the wings of the butterfly, you could determine the sex of the butterfly. And there existed butterflies that one wing was one way and the other wing was the other way. So this transsexual, homosexual is nature driven, is God driven, if you want to go that way. It's part of nature and needs to be addressed. Now that we know that the attraction that you have for a female is built in somewhere in your brain, and in others, their brain is built differently, and that natural attraction, squirrels know how to have sex. They don't read about it. It's built into the nature of the being. And if that's not God-given, I don't know what is.
Well, I agree with you, and I have to tell you that in this commission, we heard from homosexuals who said, oh, halavai, it was just a choice. If it were just a choice, I would have had such a much easier life. But it's not. And this whole business of conversion therapy and so forth, it doesn't work and causes harm. And the number of suicides that have taken place of these people continues, by the way, to be a serious issue. It's not as bad, I think, but I think, Bob, you're right. And in fact, the rabbis, there is talk of hermaphrodites. That is people who are born with both male and female sexual organs. So it, as well as people who are born without sexual organs. So these things appear in rabbinic literature. So they had some connection, some knowledge of it, not what we have, obviously. Stephen.
What Bob just mentioned is very interesting. And I want to see if a comparison is justified between what we believe that Hashem has instilled in us. Almost most thinking Jews would agree that we have a good inclination, a yetzer, and a bad.
Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara.
Yes, so we have these two inclinations. Hashem created us with them, not for the purpose of following the route of the evil inclination, or even a balance, as a challenge to follow the good inclination as much as we can. It's a challenge every moment with us. So my comparison, is it justified or not, that what he explained with the butterflies and it exists in humans, is that created also as a challenge not to be off what many of us would call the straight road of relationships with men only, with the opposite sex. And furthermore, when you see the Orthodox and the Hasidic, the men are dancing with each other, the women are dancing. That's an expression of affiliation with the same sex, but it only goes that far. It is a community of men and women associating with each other in a way of celebration, whatever. But it ends there. It's like on a speedometer. It stops you from going further.
Well, let me say a couple of things, Stephen, in response, and then I think Nelson wants also to speak. Let me say two things. Number one, the rabbis say, thank God we have the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara, if there were no Yetzer Hara, there would be no children. There would be no birth. Nobody would build a house. Nobody would start a company. The Yetzer Hara is not all negative. It can be if it's not directed in the right way. But we must recognize the value of it. We are created with it. Without it, we're not human beings. It can lead us astray, but if it is pointed in the right direction, if it is in control, then it is a plus. With regard to homosexuality in the Orthodox community, I have to tell you, I had, when I was in Hillel, a very painful interaction with an Orthodox student who was gay and who could not find his place. He, thank God, since then, we have a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Steve Greenberg, who is an Orthodox rabbi and who is gay and who celebrates both aspects of his life. But in the ultra-Orthodox community, not the modern Orthodox community, and not all modern Orthodox either, but in the ultra-Orthodox community, it's not accepted. And so you have some very, very tragic stories of people who grow up in that situation, some of whom become drug addicts, some of whom commit suicide, and some of them leave that community and find a loving community in which they can continue to be Jewish and are accepted. But it's a new world, folks. It's not that these things didn't exist. We have this terrible piece in Leviticus, which is part of the Torah reading for Mincha on Yom Kippur, where we read the laws of arayot, of the incest, of forbidden sexual relations. And there it says, a man who lies with another man, this is a to'eva to God. I accept the interpretation that made probably 50 years ago by Rabbi Herschel Matz, Zichrono Livracha. I can even say Zecher Tzadik Livracha. I didn't know him well, but the little bit I knew was quite a loving and profound rabbi. He said the rabbis didn't understand that homosexuality, they didn't understand it at all. What they were condemning was heterosexual men acting as if they were homosexual. That's forbidden. That's a to'eva. But people who are born with homosexual, whatever it is in their body, that is not condemned in the Torah. They didn't know anything about it. We didn't know anything about it. In fact, truth of the matter is, one of the things we learned in this sexuality commission is that at the time, again, 30 years ago, they knew nothing about lesbians. All that they knew was studies of men, homosexual men. No one had studied homosexual women at that time. We talked with the top biologists and psychiatrists in New York City. And we learned that they knew nothing about women. Nobody had studied them. Nelson.
Well, this is a strange, I just want to say a couple things. Bob reminded me with his Ohio State t-shirt that the president of Ohio State is a female who has a wife.
Aye.
And she seems to be well respected and well accepted. And from my days in Central Ohio, that's a real remarkable social change. Because it's not just among students, it's among donors and politicians and the like. And I think it's a very positive step. Butterfly, yeah.
Oh, look at that butterfly. Wow.
Advertising.
Wow. That is something.
Susan, my wife of blessed memory, told me about a pair of homosexual couples she knew that lived in a two-family, what we would call in Detroit, a two-family flat, an up and a down. And once the doors were closed, the two men occupied one flat and the two women occupied the other. And I would say to Stephen, and I would say to you, we can see the ultra-Orthodox, Haredi, whoever, dancing men to men, but what happens closed doors is another question. And that we don't see. I used to claim mockingly to Rabbi Hecht that he and Sheila were not good role models because we never saw what they did in the bedroom. Yeah, they had children. They lived a long life together, but we never saw what they did.
There is
a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Elliot.
Did Buber get into sexuality? I read the I Am Thou, and I don't remember him getting into that at all.
No,
I didn't think so.
I agree.
By the way, I know a psychiatrist who takes his patients homosexual butterflies.
I would just say there's a famous story, Nelson, about a rabbi who goes into his teacher's bedroom and hides under the bed. And the rabbi, his teacher, sees him and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I want to learn. You're my teacher. I want to see how you make love to your wife. I want to learn how to do it." Sheila and Michael, alava shalom, were the rabbinic couples for, I guess, many, but certainly for the marriage encounter, which my wife and I went to when we moved to Cleveland 40 years ago. And they were the presenting rabbinic couple. What we know, the little bit that we know about what's going on in the Haredi community, is that it isn't all what it looks like from the outside. Okay. Yes, and Nelson.
I want to answer another one of Elliot's questions. Quoting you, I think we live in the age of calculus. Calculus is a measure of change. The one constant is things change.
Absolutely. The crazy thing that in God's world is that the strongest pressure is inertia. And yet, nothing that is alive is static. So we're constantly dealing with this. We're not always aware of it.
But Rabbi, this goes back to my basic question. Are there fundamental no-nos? If the Torah is the philosophy on how to live life, are there things that will not have, that are meant to be without change forever, as long as the planet exists?
Yes.
I don't know about Olam. I don't know about Olam Haba, but Olam Hazeh.
Yes, there are. Absolutely. And it's our goal to know what they are and to keep them in mind and use them as guideposts. And among them are the sanctity of human life, that each human being represents a piece of the divine. And each individual, no matter their behavior, is created in God's image. And that's one. There are more, but that is one key thing that never, ever goes away. That we now recognize that sexuality is more complicated than we thought. Okay. The rabbis didn't understand that. It's not their fault. We're still trying to figure it out now. And we've made some progress. The issue is, how do we take this ancient text or these ancient texts and the modern interpretations thereof and build upon them to determine that which is eternal and that which can change and apply it to today. That's our task. We have to know what's there. We have to learn it. We have to appreciate it. We don't have to accept it all. We're living in another time. We understand things they didn't understand. However, human nature is human nature. And they understood a lot about human nature. And in those things, we can find guidance. But the challenge is that change is constant. And if we don't address the changes that have happened, then the tradition is no longer relevant. And that's a tragedy. We have to keep it relevant to life as we live it. And Judaism does not affirm a kind of a separation. You know, science is here, religion is here. You know, I'm not going to. I don't want anything about. I don't want to know anything about archaeology because it might question some things in the Bible. No, God gave us a mind. He wants us to use it. He wants us to discover the secrets of this universe. That's why he gave us a mind. He wants us to explore and to learn and to develop. And he wants us, we believe, to take his teachings and apply them to our life today.
And
I
this is
think
why
what you're saying is a reflection of the mission of the conservative movement to
You are correct.
incorporate change, but within limits. And I
You
think
are
the
correct.
vision is probably subject to a lot of controversy. What are the limits? Yes, how can we incorporate
It's
all
not
that?
limits. It's not, I wouldn't call it limits. I would say we should be, and we try to be, at that point where we take the tradition, we learn the tradition, we explore it in its complexity and in its depth. And it is very, very deep and very wide. We explore as much as we can. And we try to use what we've learned in our life today and apply that in decisions that we make today. We're not going to agree, but if we can study these texts together and debate these things, that's what God wants us to do.
Makes sense.
I don't believe that there is one answer to what exactly we should be doing in many areas. We can discuss things, but on the basis of our learning the tradition and of our respect for that tradition and for each other and for the opinions that each of us brings.
So it seems to me, Rabbi, that the conservative movement is going to have to work very hard to make it clear to the public what on earth it represents and to make it clear, the clear distinction between it and the reform movement.
Too late. Too late.
You're an apostle of pessimism.
Too late. Too late.
Rabbi,
As
this
I
is what-
explained in the talk that I gave to your think tank.
And we're going to invite you back, Rabbi.
The reform movement has moved enough towards the tradition that the vast majority of people who belong to conservative congregations, I'm not talking about the rabbis, nor am I talking about the very few people who are really conservative Jews, who keep kosher, who come every Shabbos and who are really, really conservative in the sense that halacha is important to them. They may drive on Shabbat, but they're going to go to shul every Shabbat, not just Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, like the majority who belong to conservative congregations, but they're Reform. Those people are comfortable in Reform congregations almost as much as they are in the congregations to which they belong. There's enough Hebrew for them. They don't understand it anyhow. The music is even nicer in the Reform.
There were more rabbis like you. I think it would help to save the conservative movement. So we're going to invite you back, Rabbi, to speak with Tristan Newman, who aspires to become a conservative rabbi. We're going to work together.
I look forward to it, but do you know how many entering students are coming into the seminary this year?
How many?
That's private information. I'm afraid you'll reveal it.
No, I want to know. How many were there 10 years ago and 30 and 50 years ago? And how many are there now next year, this year?
Our class, I came into the seminary in 1959 and was ordained in 1963. And I think at that time was the smallest class that had been there since I don't know when. There were only 13 of us.
Wow.
Today, I believe there are only 6 people coming into the seminary.
When does the semester start?
It starts. It's going to start soon. I think September. But as far as I know, they have very, very few students. And if you read at the University of Judaism Rabbinical School, the Ziegler School, there's no more tuition.
Wow.
But they don't have very many students either.
So
what are their acceptance standards? What are they expecting upon admission?
No, I don't think the problem is the standards. I think the problem is the number of people applying. It's not a very desirable place to go.
Very sad.
It isn't that 200,000 plus a year? 300 if you make it to the top. Okay, Rabbi Wolpe's retiring next year.
But I have to tell you that I received yesterday the Brandeis Alumni magazine, and there's a lead article there about the American Jewish community, which I just began. I didn't read it yet, except for the first couple paragraphs. But in the first couple paragraphs, it says that in 1990, when the results of the demographic study were that intermarriage was a big, big deal, and people were predicting the end of the American Jewish community, the article continues to say, not only did the community not shrink, it grew. That 2/3 of intermarried couples who have children are raising their children Jewish. 2/3. It used to be the other way around, not too long ago.
What do you think accounts for this increase? How do you explain that?
Well, a variety of things. A little bit immigration of Soviet Jews and Israelis, but also the number of converts and the number of intermarried people who are raising Jewish children. Anyhow, when I finish the article, I'll share what more I learned in the article next week.
Rabbi, I'm catching up to you. I just turned 80 about 8 weeks ago. And until 10 years ago, or I could even say 5 years ago, my average for Shabbat was probably close to 50 a year, close to. Maybe it was 48 or 9 or 50. but since COVID, it's been affected and my average has gone down. Now, having said that, I've always been uncomfortable and hesitate to go to any Reform temple for Shabbat service. I feel I'm in a. Why do you think Holy Blossom was called the church on the hill? Not just because it was on a hill and Bethesda was down in the valley. Okay. And even though I feel somewhat out of place when I went to the one of the Hasidic, not a Chabad shul, I feel so comfortable. But some other Hasidic, Babov it was, I went to a Babov service and I didn't even know who these people were, but I didn't feel uncomfortable. I felt welcome and I felt that these are my people. So having said all that, Elliot and I want to relate this to Kohelet because that's what we've been sort of fringing on. Elliot and I are now studying at Beth Abraham in Dayton with a Toronto vicinity-born rabbi, Aubrey Glazer. So there is a season for everything. But does it also say that there is also no season, as you were talking about 5 minutes ago, no season, as Elliot inferred, for certain things to not change? Is that also part of or in addition, in opposition to what Kohelet is saying?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, in Kohelet, there's a season for this and for that.
Yes.
Usually often there's a season. But Elliot said a few moments ago, is there no season that can occur for any change? That there are certain constants that don't change, that there isn't this or that. It's this way and that's the only way.
God and the inanimate, anything that's not alive, that doesn't change. Anything that is alive is changing. If we don't change, we die. We're constantly losing cells and gaining them. When that process stops, we're dead. Until it stops, we're changing.
What would the quantum physicists say? Isn't there always some form of energy, although it is changing, even after a person has left this world physically? And by the way, Steve, you have the wrong name for Holy Blossom. I think it should be called Holy Flower.
You don't like a blossom? Okay, anyhow, see you next week, everybody. Stay well. And stay well.
Excellent class. Have a good week. A good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, everybody.